Obviously, lots to get to today. And so without further ado, we're going to begin to open up discussions to our members. We want to thank our members for coming out this morning. And I guess we'll start with the topic everybody wants to hear about. Of course, immigration. Lots of talk on Capitol Hill. So what is the real truth? What's going to happen? And where do conservatives stand? We're going to open that question up to our guests for today.
I drew the short straw, I guess. So, I think really right now the proper framing of this is not really an immigration debate. This is a constitutional debate. And at the very essence of the question is not what we're going to do on immigration, because that will get dealt with next year in the 114th Congress. But really, what are we going to do about the separation of powers? Because if this executive overreach is allowed to stand and we fund it, then indeed what we are is complicit in really giving power to the executive branch that our founding fathers never really intended to do. So for me, it's one of trying to make sure that we keep the government funded until we can have a more common sense, longer term strategy that hopefully will be taken up in the very early stages of the 114th Congress.
I'll add a little bit on that, I guess, as well. For me, in general, on the appropriations, it's the shorter the better. We want a major election. We have 6 House members that will likely be senators come Saturday's election results, and it makes no sense to punt all or most of our appropriations till October and let these agencies and this president continue to set policy when clearly American people said no. We're looking for you to block this president, block his agenda, block his policies, and pass some of your own.
I would just add to the first two. The constitutional question, the Judiciary Committee is having a hearing here at 1 o'clock on that very issue, and what the president did is as many of us view, and more importantly, people who are scholars in the law view as unconstitutional action. And then second, to Tim's point, the cavalry is coming. We're going to have a historic majority in the House in 4 weeks, and as Tim pointed out, a number of our colleagues are going to be heading to the United States Senate, as well as Mr. Sullivan and Miss Ernst. So let's. I would much rather deal with some of these issues when we have those kind of majorities in the House and Senate in January. And so that's one of the messages we communicated this morning to some of our colleagues.
I guess I'm next up. I think we have a lot of an agreement on the dais here about what the problem is primarily a constitutional problem, if not a constitutional crisis, the crux of which, yes, the president does have prosecutorial, help me with that, Mark, prosecutorial discretion. It's too early in the morning, even at 11:15 to say that word, especially if you're from Louisiana. But anyway, it's the scope to provide that blanket waiver to an entire class of people is really not a prosecutorial action. It's really changing the law, and the president himself actually made that statement. But what our approach is, of course, is we're talking about a resolution of disapproval, but of course that really has no effect in law. It only states where we are on this. A second thing would be something done through the courts where we could get an injunction, but that's very difficult to do. We're already trying to do that under Obamacare. So it really leaves the power of the purse, and the discussion here is, well, the big fear out there, the elephant in the room is, well, does that mean a shutdown? Well, it doesn't have to, because if we pass 98% of our spending really all our appropriations except for DHS all the way till next October, then that's an impossibility. So we leave a CR that would go into next year. I think the fly in the ointment for me on this is that why would we extend a continuing resolution to the end of March on DHS? Why not vote on it the first day we're back when we do get all of our troops in place in the Senate? And so I'm reluctant to support this idea unless we shorten that CR at least until January 15th. And even then, it's still difficult because the president, if he can grant such waivers to delayed actions for 5 million or more who are here illegally, what's to keep him from moving money from one account to another? Again, we could just have another constitutional battle. So these are all still difficult issues, even though the American people have seen to it to put Congress in Republican hands. As a counterbalance to the president still doesn't seem to get the message on that. And so these are all important issues that are going to unfold in the next 30 days.
I guess I do have something to add, and that is that when I'm home talking to my constituents, they're concerned about jobs and the economy. We know that less than 30% of the American people think that our economy is strong. And because of that, when you couple it with the fact that the Senate passed an immigration bill and the House passed an immigration bill during the current Congress, and then the president has chosen to act unilaterally about this in spite of the fact that both the House and the Senate passed immigration bills during the current Congress. That is what is setting up the constitutional issue. The fact that both houses did act on immigration and the president nevertheless chose to act unilaterally. So that's what makes it a constitutional issue. That aside, this is not the highest concern of the American people right now. The highest concern of the American people are a sluggish economy and the lack of good jobs. How does it advance the job prospects of Americans who are out of work, whether they are Hispanic, Black, rural, urban, to have this kind of concession made to people who are here illegally? I would argue that our priorities are wrong when the president has chosen this as an issue that he is pushing the button of the Constitution on. And I wish that he were more concerned about jobs, about how many could be created quickly if we were dealing with the Keystone Pipeline, if we were dealing with some other trade issues, if we were dealing with the 40-hour work week in the Obamacare bill that doesn't allow employers to use the 40-hour work week in the manner that it did prior to Obamacare. Those are the issues that people care about. So I believe the president's priorities are so misplaced that it is important for our party to refocus come January on the things the American people care about, and that is how to live a better life for them and their families. And it's all gotten lost in Washington gamesmanship.
I'd like to try to answer the question, but before I do, I'd like to know exactly what it is. I got here late.
In terms of immigration, obviously after the president's recent action, what is the plan from the House as far as moving forward?
Okay, most members would answer without even knowing the question, but I'm a little dim and I like to know the question. Well, you can't not fund a negative. In other words, the president has said he's not going to enforce the immigration law, so you can't, by not funding him, get him not to. I mean, a double negative doesn't work. What you could do was not fund implementation of the processing of the permits for the undocumented to stay in the country. You could not fund that. You still wouldn't be enforcing the immigration law. They would still be in the country. And I would support some effort to not fund the implementation of his executive order. But I would go farther, and another, not myself, but another member said this at the conference this morning. Republicans are not anti-immigration, and I do think there is a path forward that the majority of the House Republican Conference and probably a lot of the Democrats could support that would be constitutional and within the law to allow some of the undocumenteds not to become citizens, but to become legal by going through a process and showing proof that they've been positive citizens and things of this sort. So, but what the president did is clearly unconstitutional. He has admitted that himself in the past, and on principle, we should not compromise. We should not, even given all the pragmatic arguments, it's only 3 weeks till the next Congress, and on principle, you don't compromise. Even if it doesn't get through the Senate, even if the president vetoes it, we should show the American people that we will protect the Constitution.
Well, looking forward to the future, looking forward to a Republican-controlled House and Senate, what can we expect as far as the next session is concerned coming from the House with legislation?
I think what Cynthia outlined, something on energy. There's obviously talk around here for a while on how we can reform the tax code that make it more conducive to economic growth and job creation. So you'll see I think a focus on those issues in the new Congress.
I think you're going to see a major, in addition to an energy bill that Jim talked about, you're going to see major medical reform of Obamacare. Chairman Upton of the Energy and Commerce Committee is going to move a major reform bill on how we do research for cancer and various diseases. I think you'll see all the committees do aggressive oversight on the regulatory apparatus of the Obama administration, with special emphasis on the EPA and some of the OSHA and some of those agencies. I hope you see an attempt by House and Senate Republican leadership to work with the Democrats so that we actually pass bills that can overturn presidential vetoes if the president chooses to not engage and just try to be a veto president. And I got elected when Ronald Reagan was still president, and Reagan was famous for taking 80 or 90% and declaring victory, and I think in the next Congress we ought to take that as our mantra too. We don't have to be 100% pure. If we can get 80 or 90% of conservative values and the president will accept it, we ought to declare victory and take that to the bank.
I think what you'll see is really a proactive plan from Republicans, because they do control both the House and the Senate, that it will be not just a blocking of what we need to stop, but more of a proactive plan, an agreement with the American people going forward. Most of you can remember a contract with America in 1994. Everybody can remember that. However, if I were to ask you what were the components of that contract, no one here could name those other than my good friend from Texas. But I do believe that the American people want a positive plan on what we're going to be supporting going forward. Energy, jobs are all going to be part of that. But I think a comprehensive, positive plan hopefully will be something that you'll see unveiled at least by a working group in the very first quarter of the 114th Congress.
All right. And at this time, we're going to open it up to our press that is here today. I want to remind everyone you can also tweet your questions using the hashtag CWC113. All right, and we'll start with you right here.
I'm Susan Cornwell with Reuters. I just wondered if you are generally pleased with what the leadership is suggesting that you do immediately in response to Obama's executive action on immigration, that is to pass the funding bill, pass the Cromnibus, pass Ted Yoho's bill. And I also wondered if you think, what conservative relationships now are like with the leadership. Do you see them as having come some ways toward you? Are they being more accommodating to you? Or not really? Do you not see that? I'd like to hear your take on
that. Susan, I appreciate the question. I will say I'm not for certain what being proposed, still being worked out, but it was my understanding a couple weeks ago leadership was suggesting a year-long, or the rest of the year, omnibus for every agency, and they seem to move back from that and suggesting DHS perhaps through March. That seems way too long. I'm of the opinion, I think the American people, particularly those who voted for those who won, are suggesting that, gosh darn it, let's get to work in January. And the greatest power we have is the power of the purse, and it shouldn't just extend to DHS. It should extend to the EPA, HHS, take your pick on agencies. And so the shorter the better in terms of making certain we use our political capital to make changes here in Washington. So they're coming our way in terms of making it shorter, but I'm hearing from conservatives say, well, why would we authorize the EPA till October 1st? The most expensive regulation in human history, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, was just proposed on the ozone. We've got the waters of the U.S., so we can go down a list of things. I do not want to give those up, because that's what I heard from constituents in Kansas. You got to do something about them, and not just on immigration, but other agencies as well.
Chad.
Thank you. Good morning. Do you think, though, that there is there's a certain amount of pressure that conservatives can apply to leadership in this next couple of weeks on the spending bill and immigration here, when it seems as though the leadership seems bound and determined to do some sort of a Cromnibus here, and that is enough? Now, like you said, Mr. Huelskamp, you don't want to fund EPA, very long and try to get into that a little bit here. But what about, is that real? Is that something that you guys can actually get to and then say, all right, guys, on the right, we did the best we can, and we have to take this, and otherwise we're going to run into real problems?
I think the real answer to that question becomes how many people are willing to go with a Cromnibus without limitation language, and I don't think that there's the votes there, which is the Cromnibus being a CR in addition to the omnibus for those that haven't been following it. But the other aspect of that is outside of that. I think there is a general consensus that a very short-term clean CR that allows us to come back in January or February to deal with it is another pragmatic approach. And so instead of passing a long-term omnibus that perhaps you have to stomach things like EPA regulations and others, that we pass a shorter-term CR to be able to deal with this in January or February.
Chad, I'd like to answer on that. I don't know why you want to reward the Senate for bad behavior. I mean, What if they passed one of the appropriations bills out of 24 over the last 2 years? So why would we even listen to what the Senate has got to say? I think what we ought to be doing is short CRs, incentivizing the president to do the right things instead of the wrong things. Put things on the table that make it very, very difficult for people to vote against. For example, full funding of our military for the full year. I could buy into that. How about restoring the restrictions and sanctions against Iran? How about supporting Israel? Putting those on the table and making the president and making the Senate have a difficult decision when they would look at a short term. But use a series of small CRs so that we reward good behavior instead of bad behavior and recapture the power of the purse, which we've been advocating for so long.
I think the voters understand, as I've said back home and said here, that the cavalry is coming, and that you're going to have an unprecedented majority in the House. I think the highest we've had in 80 years of Republicans come January. You're going to have 8 new members of the Senate. Why in the world would you want to extend a CR funding bill out for several months out? Why not wait for those people to get here? I think the voters who elected us, that's what they would expect. They think that makes a lot of sense. Fund the government, but let's do it for a short period of time, and let's wait for our friends to get over in the Senate, and then we can put in place the kind of spending measures that we need to.
Yes.
Yes, hi, and my name is Neil Monroe with the Daily Caller. Excuse me, in terms of this amnesty fight, do you think your position on the amnesty is supported by a majority of people in swing states in the 2016 election? Sorry for being so crass here, but are you on the popular side of this issue? And secondly, are any of you making the arguments over the fairness of the president handing out 5 million work permits in a year when 4 million Americans will enter the job market?
Well, I'm from Ohio, and we're always a fairly important state in presidential elections. And I would argue, I think we're on the side of the folks in Ohio when it comes to the Constitution, as I think Mr. Meadows mentioned earlier. They, I think, get the simple fact that a president just can't do what he did, particularly when you look at what he said just a few years earlier, saying that he couldn't do it, and then he went ahead and did it. So I think we're on the side of the people when it comes to that fundamental principle. And as I said, I come from a state that's always, fairly important in a presidential election.
What about the fairness argument?
I would say in terms of providing quasi-legal status, work permits, and Social Security cards to those who are here in this country illegally, I think Americans would find that fundamentally unfair. I mean, again, providing Social Security cards to those who are illegally in this country is unfair. And I'll say from personal experience, and there's millions of Americans similar to me that we sweat blood, tears, prayer, trying to get my 2 girls immigrated into this country illegally. And they did. We went through the legal process. If we had not, though, we could apply under the DACA program. And fundamentally, I think it's unfair to say, you know what, just because you went through the legal process, that's being put down. And it's also interesting with the provisions the president suggested. Who would have thought? How fair is it that if someone comes to you and has received this special deferred adjudication under the president, that you get a worker permit, and there's a penalty for hiring someone who is here legally? Because don't forget, the president said he don't qualify for Obamacare. And so if you hire them and don't provide health insurance, there's a $3,000 penalty this president's imposing on businesses that want to hire American citizens. That's fundamentally unfair, Mr. President. Why would you say hire an illegal versus hire an American citizen? And by the way, let them get in the Social Security system as well. So I think the more folks learn about that, I think the more angry they're going to be about what this president has proposed.
Okay. Ginger?
This is a question for the whole panel. How many of you plan to vote for John Boehner to be Speaker of the House? And if you're not voting for John Boehner, who do you plan to support?
We only have one. But realistically, we have one candidate that conference voted for Boehner. There wasn't any opposition to him in the conference. Well, I can only speak for myself, but I will vote for the current speaker, Mr. Boehner.
All right. Melissa.
Do you feel that vulnerable Democrats who oppose Obama on this measure will join you in stopping the immigration executive action?
Only if they're forced to vote on it. I mean, the House can send things over there, and under the Senate rules, in order to kill the House appropriations, there's some vulnerable Democrats in the Senate going to have to take a vote on this. And I think there's 5, 6, 7 sitting U.S. senators of the Democrat Party who've said that we don't like this action. They are desperately trying to avoid a vote on this. I would say that strategy didn't work in the last 2 years, eventually caught up with them. But there's certainly one for Louisiana doesn't want to vote on it this week, because I'm pretty certain a vote might be different this week than it would be next week. And so, yeah, I think if forced to it, they'll vote on it. But the public actions, I think, again, from 7 of them says, we don't like the president's actions, executive amnesty either.
Well, and I think that's why it's critical that we have a vote on it, because giving them a free pass and not having the, they can't have it both ways and say we're against the president when they go back home and then come up here and not have a vote. And that's why it's critical that we have a vote.
If I could ask a quick follow-up.
Sure,
do you
quickly.
fear that conservatives are being led down a path of a show vote?
Well, it's not a show vote if you're voting to overturn or disapprove or not accept the president's executive order. I mean, if you really think about it, if the president can do what he did with impunity, you don't need the Congress. Now, there might be a lot of hurrahs about that, but the truth is our system is a system of checks and balances. Legislatively, we start the House and the Senate, and when the House and the Senate finally agree through a conference committee, you send it to the president, and he agrees or he or she agrees or disagrees, and if they disagree, send it back. But it protects the voter, it protects the citizenship, because you have all these checks and balances. Well, if this executive order is allowed to stand and is constitutional, you don't need the legislative body. All you need is a president, and the president can be both the creator of the law and the executor of the law. That's not the system our founding fathers set up. So some Democrats should look beyond the policy, which they may support, and support us on the procedure, which if they don't support us on procedure, then they are, in a technical sense, irrelevant and not necessary.
And I believe it's incumbent upon members of Congress to defend constitutional authority. I think we would be remiss if we did not challenge the president on this.
I will say as well, James Madison said the greatest single power of Congress was the power of the purse. This is the perfect opportunity. This is the time for Congress to utilize that power. Mr. President, contrary to a claim of some folks on the Appropriations Committee 2 weeks ago, we do have the authority to stop you by defunding your action, by preventing. We do have that authority. We have that responsibility. And much as I didn't want to be sitting here in December dealing with this, this is the time, and this is the place, and this is exactly what the election was about, ladies and gentlemen, about this president saying, I am going to go around the Constitution, I'm going around Congress, and I'm going to shove it down your throats, including the American people who just said no. And so if we back off, we're ceding exactly what we all ran on. And we all ran as conservatives. There's nobody, I think, in a conference stood up and said, you know what, I think the president should be able to do anything by executive order, even by amnesty. No, we all says, let's push back. And here's our opportunity, here's our time. And until, if and when we lose, we're going to continue to fight. The folks in this room, and I think a strong majority of the conference understands, again, not just the issue of immigration, but the issue of Article 1 versus Article 2 on our Constitution.
Yes.
Well, it's still a work in progress. I don't think, if I understood correctly, the leadership hadn't made any final decisions. But if they did ask us to vote on what was presented as I think it's fair to say, a probable package, I would vote no, because I don't think you fund any unconstitutional action, even if it's only for a short period of time. I don't think you can. I understand the pragmatic debate. You know, as Jim Jordan pointed out, we're going to have the cavalry here in 3 or 4 weeks, so don't attack the enemy when you've got reinforcements on the way that'll give you a superior advantage later on. But constitutionally, if it's wrong, it's wrong, and we need to figure out a way to defend that principle and also be pragmatic. And I do think that's possible if the leadership will take some of the suggestions that some of the panel made this morning. I think we could have a win-win.
Yeah, it seems to me we should send the Senate a bill that funds the government, but also puts limitations on what restricts what the president did in his executive order 2 weeks ago. And then if Harry Reid and the Senate don't pass that, then we look at the idea, okay, then let's do something very short term, and let's wait for the majority in the Senate to change.
I'd like to add to that. I agree with my colleagues. What would be a more dramatic statement by Republicans taking over the Senate and growing our majority in the House than the first day we're sworn in, or at least the first legislative day, that we vote on a new CR? Why should we wait till the end of March? I think that would be a huge statement and pushback against a president who's acting unconstitutionally.
Okay. Again, I want to remind everyone, continue to tweet in your questions at #CWC113. Actually getting a lot of support from a lot of folks on Twitter for some of the things that we are hearing. A lot of folks saying, use the power of the purse to stop whatever you can that's coming out of the president's agenda that is going against what the American people want. Yes, sir.
The debt limit suspension expires in the spring. How would you all like to see the debt limit increase handled next year?
I'd like to see it attached to the budget. Apparently, it used to be attached to the budget because the budget is the vision document for how money will be spent going forward. And Republicans have put forth a plan to balance the budget within 10 years. The RSC put forth a plan to balance the budget in 4 years. If we can show the American people that we want a budget that will balance within something between 4 and 10 years, and that the debt ceiling would be raised only with that strategy in mind, that strategy being to balance the budget within 10 years or less, I think it would help make the case for why Republicans should control the purse strings, because the president has never proposed a budget that balances. His budgets are unsustainable. And when the person who is proposing completely unsustainable budget increases is also asking for an increase in the debt ceiling, there's no end game. We can't show the American people that we represent that we have a plan to extinguish this debt that is going to accrue as we get older and as our children inherit it. So that's why I think we should actually tie the budget to the debt ceiling.
I think that you also have to tie getting back to the rule of law, because none of this is worth anything if you have no enforcement policies. And we've seen a degradation in that aspect under this administration and the current AG. So I think we need to restore the rule of law back to the same aspect.
Well, I would note, given the president's flip-flop on what his authority is on executive amnesty, he is opposed to what he's doing now, or he was opposed. I will say, you might recall in each of the debt ceiling debates since I've been here, there were plenty of folks on the left that encouraged the president to act as if there were no debt ceiling, suggesting he had unilateral authority. If we let him run loose on executive amnesty, I would not be surprised if suddenly the president changed his mind on this issue as well and suddenly discovered his brand new authority to ignore the debt limit that's in law.
Yeah, I'm Tamara Keith from NPR. I have two questions, semi-related. On the Cromnibus thing, do you sense that most of the conference is with you, or are they with leadership on this proposed Cromnibus? I guess my question is, do you think that the leadership proposal is in trouble in any way? And then my other question is, when you talk about the cavalry coming in after the first of the year, some members who are close to leadership are saying, well, actually, our numbers will be better and we won't have as much of a problem with the conservatives. That they think that they'll be able to use that larger number and marginalize you. And I'm wondering what you think of that theory.
I think the problem is not the conservatives, it's the American people. Are we going to stand by and allow the American people's voice to not be heard? That's what it gets down to. And is the Cromnibus without limitation language in terms of funding the unconstitutional acts of this president in trouble? I think the answer to that is yes.
All right, we want to, of course, extend. Excuse me. We'd like to extend a special welcome to Congressman Labrador. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. And again, I'm going to ask that you raise your hand, and when you get called on, to then ask your question. Yes, sir.
Not to interrupt that question, but for you, is a shutdown off the table? And not to play the would you rather game, but would you rather fund the government and effectively fund this executive action, or would you rather shut down the government and have that fight now?
Nobody wants to shut down the government. I mean, I've never been in a Republican conference in 30 years where somebody stood up and said, hey guys, let's develop a plan to shut the government down. You just don't do that. Now, sometimes back when Clinton was president and we were in the new Republican majority for the first time in 40 or 50 years, we sent spending bills to President Clinton that didn't spend as much money as he wanted to. He vetoed the spending bill, and we got blamed for shutting the government down, but it was the president who did it by vetoing the spending bill that we sent him. So this, we're about solutions. Republicans want solutions. We want them to be constitutional. We want them to be in tune with where the majority of the American people are. We have a president who appears to feel he can act beyond the Constitution, disregard election results. When he says, I heard those of you who voted, but I also heard those of you who didn't, that's a pretty telling statement. So I don't think I got to conference a little bit late this morning, but what my impression was, the leadership is trying to develop a plan, and they spent a lot of time listening, and I'm comfortable that at some point in time this week or next week they'll come up with a plan that most of us can support. Now, we don't have that plan yet, but I think we're getting there, and I do think to be a little pat ourselves on the back as conservatives, having Steve Scalise as the Republican whip helps a lot, because he is of the leadership style where he does a lot of information gathering and a lot of listening, and I think he's had a positive influence on Mr. Boehner and Mr. McCarthy.
The only discussions that we have had are, will we fund all of the government for less than the full fiscal year, or will we fund part of the government for the full fiscal year and another part for something less than the full fiscal year? Those are the only two alternatives that have ever been discussed by Republicans.
The Senate has time and time again taken a CR at the levels that everybody agreed to. So you got the Ryan Murray plan, the numbers everyone agreed to. If we have to go with a CR for a short period of time, as Mr. Fleming and Mr. Meadows and others have, and I've suggested, at the numbers that Democrats and Republicans all agree to, how is that a great distance? That's been done time and time again. I don't see how anyone can talk about a shutdown when we're talking about that possibility.
Okay, right.
Hi, it's Mike Memley with the LA Times. We've talked a lot in this venue about the status of a House immigration bill and the possible timing of that. Now that Mr. Labrador, you're here, perhaps you can weigh in, or anyone else on the panel. The conversation had been in past sessions that the lame duck would not be the time. The time would be early in the next Congress before the presidential primary season really kicks into high gear. I wonder what you see as the prospects for a House immigration bill or series of bills moving early next year, and has that already been a topic of discussion in your conference meeting so far?
Yes, and I think, I apologize, I have a cold, so it's on. It's just my voice. Yeah. I think we will have a series of bills. We won't have just one immigration bill, but we will have a series of bills early next year. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of bills they are. Hopefully they will go through the Judiciary Committee. I think one of the problems we're having right now is that once again leadership is going through an exterior process instead of using the committee of jurisdiction to go through the process of what do we do with the president. So we should have Judiciary Committee hearings. We should pass the bills that we've already passed. And I think you guys in the media need to really tell this story straight. Every time the president says that we haven't done anything, he's not telling the truth. We have passed border security bills. We have passed a lot of different bills dealing with high-tech immigration. We passed a bill that dealt with the numbers of visas, the caps on visas. We started immigration reform, and remember what the president said. The president said that he would veto every one of them because it wasn't the comprehensive bill that he wanted us to pass. And in fact, when he's gone to the American people, he says that he would take away his executive order, not if we pass an immigration bill. Listen to his words. His words are, he will take away the executive order if we pass the Senate immigration bill. That's extortion. What he's telling the American people is that he is unwilling to take away an unconstitutional and illegal act that by his very own words was unconstitutional and illegal. He's unwilling to do that unless we pass only one bill, which is the Senate immigration bill. So let me give you a history about this president. When he was a senator, he killed the Bush immigration bill. He made an agreement with the White House. Do your research, please, because you guys don't do a very good job of doing your research on this stuff. The president, when he was Senator Obama, went to the White House, told George W. Bush that he was going to help him pass immigration reform. He went to the Senate floor, and he killed the Senate immigration bill by voting for amendments that were pro-labor union and against guest worker programs. We can't fix the immigration process without a guest worker program. So what does this president do? He kills the immigration bill as a senator. Then he says, as a candidate, that the first thing he's going to do is he's going to pass immigration reform. Well, he had a House and a Senate for 2 years in Democratic hands, and guess what? He didn't do anything about immigration reform. And now he says that he has to go outside of the Constitution and outside of the law and around Congress because the Congress will not act. When he failed to act as a senator, when he failed to act as a president with a House and a Senate in Democratic hands, and now he's blaming us for the failure to act. Please do your research and stop being shields for this president, because I'm sick and tired of hearing the president say something that is not true.
All right, and with that, since this is the final CWC for the 113th Congress, I'm going to ask each of our conversation chairs to just share a quick something about, over the past couple of years, what CWC has meant to the conservative movement and to the conservative voice. So if you just want to share just a brief something.
Well, I guess, Jamie, given I've had some great staff going before you as well that helped put this together. I think what I've seen in visiting with the reporters in this room, this is pretty freewheeling and pretty open. A chance to say, hey, you know, it's not canned, as you've seen. We don't all walk in with some talking points. It's what we're hearing generally, and I think it's opportunity.
All my answers are canned. So.
Yeah, I noticed that. Where did you get that can, Raúl? But it's coming from the heart, coming from what we hear at home, and I think it's pretty unusual. You hear many folks talking about what they hear back home, and here's an opportunity for conservatives to throughout the country to speak up and say what we're worried about through us. So we're going to continue to do this in the future, moving forward. And you know, there's some tough questions we have to take here, but that's part of the job of being open and accessible and saying we're about change up here. No more status quo, and it's been pretty exciting to see the changes we've been able to help pull off in the last few years.
I'll just briefly thank Heritage for hosting, and I thank the press for coming. You don't have a press event if the press doesn't show up, so we appreciate you coming here and asking questions and interacting with us as Tim described.
You know, I do want to thank the press. Sometimes I'm hard on you guys, but I appreciate that you come and you listen, you take it from us, and you have an interaction with us. What I love about this event is that it isn't canned. It isn't just talking points. It's just conservatives talking to the press instead of waiting for people to try to, outside people trying to say what we believe. We can tell you directly what we believe. So thank you very much for being here.
I think it gives conservatives in the House a medium to show the American people through you folks, both in the print media and the electronic media, that we have conservatives that are thoughtful and are solution-oriented. And I get a lot of real positive feedback on Facebook and Twitter and emails that a lot of people in my district pay attention. I've got a bunch of them watching live right now, and they're giving me feedback as I speak, so to speak. So I enjoy doing it, and I'm glad to be a part of it. And I want to thank the organizers for including me.
All right, well, that's going to conclude this edition of Conversations with Conservatives. Thanks so much for coming out.